Hello and welcome to Baking Butterly Love. In this video, I'm going to tell you the story of the most annoying cake ever, also known as how to make a plaid buttercream design. So I've had this idea for a while now to do a plaid buttercream cake, but it turns out it was actually a lot harder than I thought it would be. And the more I fussed with it to try to get it to look how I wanted, the messier it got, and the whole process turned out to be very annoying. So hopefully you can learn from my mistakes, and if you decide you want to try out this technique, you'll have a better time. Alright, so to start off, I'm applying a very thick layer of frosting. Between all the horizontal and vertical stripes that I'll be doing, I'm going to end up scraping off a lot. So I want to make sure I start off with a nice thick layer. Next, I'm going to make the first set of stripes using my cake comb. When you use a cake comb like this, you want to make sure you're holding it as straight as possible, so it helps to make sure the bottom of the comb is flat against your cake board or your turntable. You'll also want to completely clean the comb off between each pass, otherwise you'll end up pushing more of the frosting back into the empty grooves. So just go ahead and scrape the comb around the cake as many times as you need to get the grooves all clear. And then you're going to put the cake in the fridge or the freezer for about 20 minutes. You just want the first coat of frosting to be completely firm before you move on to the next step. Now I decided that I wanted to make thin stripes that were a bit spaced out. So I'm filling in only every other groove with white frosting. Then I'm going to go back in and fill in the rest with that same blue color that I used for the original coat. After all the grooves are filled in, the next step is to smooth everything out with a straight edge scraper. Again, you're going to want to clean off your scraper in between each pass, and it's going to take several passes around the cake to get everything looking clean. If you have a way to heat up the scraper, I like to use, I actually have like a little mini kitchen blowtorch. That will really help get everything looking clean. You can also go back and fill in any gaps as needed and then just continue to scrape until everything looks nice and smooth. Next, I'm going to create a mix of thick and thin vertical stripes. So for the thick stripes, I'm using the end of a small offset spatula to scrape out a groove. But here's actually the first point at which I would recommend you do things a bit differently. It's really hard to scrape out a perfectly straight line, and also I'm just not that patient enough to do it. So if I were to do this again, I think I would actually use my cake scraper to cut out the stripe. So I would do that by sort of pushing in at an angle from each side to create like a V-shaped notch. And I think that that would be easier and it would just create a neater stripe. For the thin stripes, I actually used a small round piping tip to scrape them out. But just like with the thick stripes, I think I would try to use my cake scraper to cut these out the next time. After you get the vertical stripes all scraped out, you'll want to chill your cake again for another 15 to 20 minutes or until everything is set up and firm. And that time really just depends on how warm your room is and how long it took you to scrape out the stripes. After the cake is chilled, fill in your vertical stripes just like we did for the horizontal ones. I'm doing white for the thin stripes and a rusty orange sort of color for the thicker stripes. Then I'm just going to start scraping vertically with my small offset spatula. So I went around once just to sort of get the bulk of the frosting smoothed out. Then you'll have to go back and scrape more carefully to get everything cleaned up. I did try scraping with a piece of acetate paper, but it's really not stiff enough to scrape off the cold frosting. So I found actually the best method was just to heat up my small offset and then work in really small sections, making sure just to clean off the extra frosting in between each section. This part definitely requires a lot of patience, and a lot of very gentle scraping because you only want to remove the excess color and nothing else, and you don't want to sort of mess up the roundness of the edges of the cake when you're scraping up. And at this point, things were actually looking pretty good. Not perfect, but I thought it was okay. And then I decided I wanted to add one more layer of detail, and that was a bad decision. So basically I wanted some of the white stripes to be running over top of the orange ones. And I thought I would just pop out those sections with my offset and then fill them back in like I did with all the other stripes. But what actually ended up happening was that I couldn't really remove and refill those sections neatly. So all of my stripes got kind of muddled and messy. So the lesson here is don't try to be so extra. I think one set of horizontal stripes and one set of vertical is good enough to get the plaid effect and easier to keep clean. Then finally, to finish the cake, I used up all my leftover frosting and just piped some rosettes and stars around the top of the cake. And if you want to learn how to pipe rosettes, I do have a video on that and I'll link it below. And I'm not gonna lie, this was definitely my favorite part of the cake because it actually turned out nice and neat looking and not sloppy like my plaid stripes. So there you have it, a plaid buttercream design. Even though it didn't turn out exactly how I was envisioning it, it was a good learning experience. And if you're crazy like me and you think you want to try it, hopefully you'll have an easier time now that you know what not to do. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week in my next video.